Hey guys, hope everyone's doing really well today or tonight. I want to make a quick video on financial independence, retire early, or also known as FIRE for those that are aware of it. Now, what FIRE is essentially the idea that, if you can really kind of compound your money together, or sorry, pull your money together and have that invested and compounding over time, that at a certain stage in your life, ideally, either in your 20s, 30s, or maybe 40s, you're able to retire early. Now, there's lots of different principles and systems and ideas when it comes to fire, and there's lots of different ways to approach it. So, yeah, I wanted to discuss just the overall idea and different ways you could implement it and whether it's right for you. So, let's get into it. So, the basics of FIRE, as we said, it stands for Financial Independence Retire Early, looks at retiring early by growing wealth aggressively. Now, the reason why it's aggressive is because you're retiring in, say, your 20s, 30s, or 40s, whereas everyone else will be retiring in their 60s or 70s. Now, the best way, or I guess the most common way that people do this, is early on in their 20s. This is when they start planning, generally speaking. They join a really high income paying job, or they join a business that happens to do really well, like a startup or some type of business that potentially pays shares to their employees, or even if you start a business. But I'd say that that's less common, because the idea, I guess, of fire is that you retire from what you don't enjoy or what most people don't enjoy, which is generally their job. And whereas a business might be something that they're actually passionate about and that they might have started themselves. So with that high income job or business, generally saving between 70 and 90% and investing that into cash flowing assets. Now, 70 to 90% might seem super high, and it is, but it's definitely possible. I mean, me personally, I save quite a bit of my money. I don't have that many expenses, so that's why I'm very fortunate enough to be able to do so. But some of these people go to really far extremes. They end up living in their car. They might move to a new country where it's a little bit cheaper and then do work remotely. Or they just might eat noodles all day. Whatever it is, there's lots of different ways you can save 80 to 90%. Um, so yeah, I mean, just depends on how you want to approach that. But it would be higher with a it would be easier with a higher paying job, say, than a minimum wage. But again, this is a key foundation to fire, so it's a requirement. You're not going to be able to achieve most types of fire by a minimum wage job. Now, cash flowing assets is really important here because you can obviously invest into real estate or potentially gold, for example. But the thing is that you're requiring that cash because you actually don't have any income, or that's the idea for most of the fires. So any asset that might grow quickly but it's not providing you any cash isn't any good, really. So you're really going to need cash flowing assets, for example, stocks, dividend investing, real estate, either residential, commercial, or some type of deposit or bond of sorts that kind of pays you that money over time. Now, obviously, to get 70 to 90% of worth of savings of your income, you're going to have to spend very little, likely embrace minimalism and decrease your lifestyle. Like I mentioned before, some people go to the extreme where they are even homeless. But I mean, that's the short-term sacrifice that they're willing to do in order to really have a really good life later on in life. So, um, and you might have mentioned, I spoke about fire with a plural, as in there's multiple fires. Now there's people saying fat fire, skinny fire. There's lots of different ways to approach it, but some will essentially have you retiring with a massive amount of wealth, and that might include a more aggressive saving style, whereas some is just retiring with just enough, maybe breaking even each month, which is a little bit easier to do and might either require a lesser time frame or less savings. And some people actually want to do 50-50. They might, from their full-time job come down to a part-time job, or they might change industries where it's a little bit more aligned with what they actually want to do. and then supplement their lifestyle, they have that income from their previous high-paying job paying them over time. And look, with fire, right? This isn't like I'd say a normal thing to do. Most people obviously retire in their 60s and 70s, but it works really well for those who, potentially sick of the 9 to 5. They're people who just don't want to work, or they don't like working, or they just want a little bit more freedom. They want to potentially not have the liabilities or the headaches involved in running a business, but they want to have that flexibility in being able to determine their schedule and how they live their life, where they do work from. Now, should you do fire? Well, look, it works really well if you're replacing your income with more meaningful activities or work to do. I think if you're just looking to, retire and sit on the beach all day, probably not the best thing in my opinion. That wouldn't work well for me. I definitely need something to do and people to hang out with, people that I can relate to, and I imagine that a lot of people that if you're a working professional, aren't sitting on the beach all day. So yeah, I think it's really important if you have things that are really meaningful to you, that you kind of align yourself with those more through something like fire. Could be really interesting. Extreme frugality is required long term, normally 5, 10, 15 years, could be even longer, but I'd say, yeah, that's about right. And it just depends on your goals again, like what number you're looking for at the end, what kind of life you want to live, if you also want to work part time. So it really just depends. You can probably calculate this, if you include a 4% um, annual, takeout or cash out of some of your investments. 4% return. Some people do 3% because that's a little bit more conservative, but give or take, if the markets go up between 8 to 10% per year, taking out 4% will mean that you're not really touching that principal, and for the most part, your investments are still growing over time, which will be really important when things just get more expensive over time for inflation. Now, look, I personally am a fan of fire. Maybe not to the degree that saving 70 to 90% or living in your car, but I think we all do need to save a little bit more. And I actually made a video on how I'm saving 90% of my income. Now, look, maybe I'm a bit of an exception because I don't really have that many expenses. But for a lot of people, it still is possible to save much more than what they're saving now. Some people don't save at all. So I think there is a culture of saving that should be more apparent, and also using that money to invest, I think, is really important. Now, there are obvious risks with if investing and relying on that investment income to fund your entire life. This is in particular if you're not working. But if 1 or 2 years you have a market downturn, or if one of your tenants in one of your properties leaves and trashes the place, you kind of those are risks that that aren't really in your control. Versus a job may be more in your control. Obviously, your employer pays you, but in terms of being able to pivot and potentially find a new job, maybe pick up an additional job if needed. Whereas your investment income, sometimes it's just out of your hands, and that obviously increases risk when it comes to being able to live through fire. Now, personally, I'm working towards fire, but like I mentioned, not as aggressively. I do want to retire a little bit earlier. I will retire a little bit earlier, but maybe not to just sit on the beach all day, but to maybe work part time or work on things that I'm really passionate about. Um, yeah, for things I find meaningful, for things that I think the world might benefit from, or people in general might really really value what I have to to give to the world. So yeah, I think fire is fantastic. Obviously, some people want to do do nothing. That's fine. Once they retire from fire, but I think a mix is would work really well for me. Now, if you're someone that's looking at this and you're quite interested, you're willing to give it a go and save quite a bit reach retirement early, then a good starting point would be figuring out the numbers. So by that I mean multiplying your annual expenses by 25, right? So if you spend let's just say you spend $100,000 a year. Now, timesing that by 25 would bring it up to $2.5 million. So, and based off that, right, if you're able to use the 4% rule and then withdraw that money over time, you generally you're safe in that ballpark. But 2.5 million is quite a lot of money to save, and I'm talking like without debt or anything. That's essentially as good as cash. It's quite a lot, but it could be done over say 5, 10, 15 years, especially in particular if you have a high paying job. Now, obviously, this adjusts depending on your situation. Once you've got that number down pat, you have an idea. But some people actually own their home outright, even though it's not generating them money per se. They want to spend a lot more than what they're currently spending. So it just depends. You might have to potentially speak to a financial advisor or do some research on YouTube. But yeah, there's lots of people talking about it and doing their own calculations as well, which I found really helpful. Now, I, if you've done the numbers and you are serious on this, I mean, you need to look at your current situation and your future situation and see in which ways you can increase your income. For example, getting a second job, starting a side hustle, potentially selling off a lot of your assets. Maybe doing what I'm doing and creating a YouTube channel of sorts. It's not generating any income now, but potentially in the future, and also decreasing your costs. So if you're renting in a really nice suburb, maybe if you can move a couple suburbs over and cut that cost in half. Maybe you join some roommates. Maybe if you have a car, you rent out that car for part of the year. Or if you have some spare rooms in your house, maybe you rent out the rooms. So I made a previous video on this that you can watch if you want some more details on that. But there are lots of ways we can all increase our income and decrease our income wherever we are in the world. Something that's really important, and I believe I've spoken about in previous videos as well, but education and learning is so crucial when it comes to money and finance, because the reality is you can be the richest person ever, but if you're not educated and interested in saving that money, retaining it, investing it, growing it, ultimately that money is going to disappear. And you can see that quite a lot with people who win the lottery, that they just end up losing a lot of it because they don't have the education up here and the learning to kind of use that money to its full advantage. So being able to include accountability partners, people that are on the same journey as you, I think could be really great. Not only to help you stay disciplined, but it's also nice to have people around you on the same mission. And this is becoming more popular. I wouldn't say it's extremely popular right now, but more and more people are talking about FIRE. And it potentially might just become the common thing in the future for early retirement. So we'll see what happens there. And look, I'll end with this, right? Worst case scenario, you can just always go back to working, and having that financial cushion if anything happens. So again, worst case scenario, if the markets go down or your investment property, something terrible happens to it, you can always go back to working, assuming you've set yourself up. You have your degree, you have your experience. You're still employable. You work well with people, etc. If businesses are wanting to hire you, then that's always a great backup plan to have. So just keep in mind that there are other ways that you can kind of supplement your income if something were to happen. So it's not the worst thing ever, especially if you're moving into somewhere that you actually enjoy working in, and it's a field of interest for you. So yeah, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video and found some value in this, all about FIRE. If you have any questions, make sure to let me know down below in the comments. But otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.